we're being told now that their Epstein files don't exist. So where's the fake stuff at? But it seems like it's trying to distract us away from the Epstein story.
So recently, Candace Owens came out swinging against the Trump administration, who is clearly engaging in some form of a cover-up regarding the Epstein story. And she chimes in on this podcast to talk a little bit about how it is not a Democratic hoax, as Trump is trying to allege now, and what could be a possible explanation for why he's trying to skirt the issue that way. So let's get her take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Donald Trump and the Zio cronies that are around him were banking on that reaction from MAGA. Just follow the king. Bow at the DJ set at the end for no reason at 2 a.m. in Barcelona. Okay, that's what they were banking on. They wanted that. They thought that Trump would say to us, jump. And everyone would go, okay, how high? So when Trump told us to simply forget about Jeffrey Epstein, started terming it a Democrat hoax, and when he said, oh, only stupid people think otherwise, oh, the weaklings think otherwise, they thought that we would just be entranced. And they were wrong. And now both Trump and the neocons around him, they are receiving the shock of their lives. They are learning that the MAGA movement was not game. The MAGA movement instead rose up like a tidal wave, and it was ready to crush Trump. That is the reality. It turns out that MAGA is not actually a cult. They were hoping it was a cult. It turns out that Trump maybe doesn't even understand the movement that he's led for the last decade, okay? Trump just learned that when it comes to children, hell hath no fury like a MAGA scorned, okay? And not just MAGA, by the way. This was left and right. People went, okay, I don't even care what boundaries we're crossing here. Release the damn files.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more with this. You've seen this from the distant left, distant right, distance that supported Trump, maybe holding their tongue to some extent, holding their nose a little bit when they walked into that polling booth. But yeah, I mean, she's right. What can you say? I mean, Trump has, flailed with absurdity to call this a Democratic hoax. And, Trump has enjoyed remarkable support and loyalty from his base. They stood with him throughout the Russiagate hoax, which clearly was that. And despite the fact that Trump's trying to lump in the Epstein story with that, they're not buying it. And when you have people like Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire chiming in and say, hey, this response is ridiculous, give us the truth, there's something wrong. There's something wrong when people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Alex Jones and Steve Bannon say similar things too. So she's totally right about this. I do think there's something to that, disrupting this notion that MAGA is just this hive-minded cult. Now, some of Trump's supporters are digging their heels and saying this is genius 4D chess, but I think those voices are fewer and far between compared to a lot of his base that hates the way this is being responded to.
Okay. You're the king of nothing if you are not prepared to defend children. That's the point. You will endure a figurative regicide unless you release the files. We're going to protect the children first and foremost. So on Thursday, he partially caved to that pressure. First, he was fighting, hoax, all these things, and then there was movement. He tweeted this on Truth Social, and Pam Bondi responded to it. He wrote, based on the ridiculous amount of publicity given to Jeffrey Epstein, I have asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. This scam, perpetuated by the Democrats, should end right now. And then you can see Pam Bondi responds and says, President Trump, we are ready to move the court tomorrow to unseal the grand jury transcripts. Okay. And then as a follow-up to this, Trump posted onto Truth Social on Saturday morning that they had done that. He shared, I have asked the Justice Department to release all grand jury testimony with respect to Jeffrey Epstein, subject only to court approval. With that being said, this is the important part, guys, so pay attention. He writes, with that being said, and even if the court gave its full and unwavering approval, nothing will be good enough for the troublemakers and radical left lunatics making the request. It will always be more, more, more.
Yeah, that's me and you, by the way, the radical left lunatics, the Democrats that actually want answers as promised from the Trump administration on this.
And then he ends it with MAGA. I kind of like that ending. MAGA. It's great. I'm telling you to look at the language there because what he's doing is he's kind of already tipping his hand, right? He's basically saying, you're not going to be happy with what we're about to give you. But he's trying to sort of prime the base to go, oh, but if any person is not happy, then they're like the raving leftist lunatics. They're troublemakers. Why are you causing so much trouble? Well, I'm going above and beyond now. I don't even care about this. I'm going to release these transcripts, but I'm going to tell you that I'm going to predict that there's going to be people that aren't happy with this.
Kash Patel did the same thing, by the way, on the Rogan show when he went on Rogan's show and talked a little bit about how the American people are going to see video from the cell, and that was ridiculous. And he said, hey, you know, there's going to be naysayers, but, you know, people are going to be able to make up their own minds, and we're going to give that to you. It's like they're preempting what the reaction will be. So she's right about that. Of course, it's absurd to reveal what you're going to call a hoax, you know, to the masses like this and just say, hey, this is Democratic hoax and it's the result of troublemakers. All absurd, by the way. But hey, I'm going to release it anyways. It really is counterintuitive. This is not what the people need. These kind of releases require court approval. They can take months at a time. This is from legal minds that have weighed in on it. And the results can be filled with redactions, which is really all we have right now in the first place. It would be status quo. We know the FBI is sitting on warrant searches. There's evidence from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial that's been withheld. We know that Epstein operated as an FBI informant. That's part of his documentation from his first conviction. One of the files from that says that. But we're not going to get those results because there is a bipartisan cover-up.
I can explain to you what he's doing there, right? It's pretty obvious, okay? He knows we're not going to get anything. We know that Jeffrey Epstein was working for the CIA and the Mossad. You'd have to be a big dummy, big dummy not to recognize that by now, okay? We now also understand that everything involving Jeffrey Epstein was really a show. It was like watching a drama play being put on. It wasn't a question ever of whether they were going to tell us who he was involved with. It was really them trying to figure out how to satisfy public interest in the case, right? Their goal was to protect the sinister truth of what he had been up to and who he was up to it for and how he had done it, but also managing to satisfy public interest. This is what show trials are all about, by the way. We just got to satisfy the public interest so we can move on. Now, you will recall that the second time when he was flying back from Paris, landed into Teterboro, he was indicted in the Southern District New York courts, right? Southern District New York courts. And we know that it's quite interesting that now Pam Bondi is trying to sell to us that the Southern District of New York is going to be the answer to everything that's gone on, right? Like suddenly the SDNY is going to be open to showing to us what happened in these transcripts. So I'm going to show you these articles, by the way, just to make it so clear that they know that we're going to get nothing in this, because they went and they interviewed some lawyers and who came out and said right away, they said, you're not going to get anything here. This is the Associated Press. Request to unseal Epstein grand jury transcripts likely to disappoint, ex-prosecutors say.
Yeah, and I don't think they'd even pursue this avenue if this wouldn't disappoint. They're sitting on information and we know it. And look, I'm with Candace in terms of thinking that the most plausible scenario is that Epstein was an asset either of the CIA or Mossad or both. I'm not willing to kind of categorically just say that straight up, but all the circumstantial evidence leads us to believe that. I think more likely on the Mossad side, not as a badge-wearing intelligence official of the Mossad, but certainly an intelligence asset that was working for Mossad, at least in certain engagements. He surrounded himself with figures prominent in Israel for Israeli prime ministers. Ehud Barak lived with them for a long time. He visited his home 30 times, and Barak was the head of Amman, which is the IDF's intelligence. He surrounded himself with other figures that worked on behalf of Israel, like Robert Maxwell and Adnan Khashoggi. So while I think that's likely, I can't come out and say it straight up that definitively. But at the same time, Candace is right. You know, they've explored these possibilities. They've decided they're not going to give us the information. And this is the route they can go through, knowing that it won't yield the information people think. Not the way that it will yield information people are looking for. So I think this is going to continue to linger and hurt the Trump administration, maybe even leading into the midterms.
Okay. And they know this because, first and foremost, it's the Southern District of New York. That's where Diddy's show trial was being held, right? That's where Trump's show trial with E. Jean Carroll was also held. That's where Justin Baldoni's show trial is being held in the SDNY. There's every bit of evidence that this district is implausibly corrupt. The state knows fully well that whatever testimony was given to indict Jeffrey Epstein, it's going to be intentionally limited. It's going to be bare minimum. Trump is just pretending to unseal this because he wants it to be enough, okay? He wants us to all think that, okay, well, only troublemakers care.
Yep, case closed, Democratic hoax. Let's just lump it in with Russiagate and the Hunter Biden concealment story. Let's just lump it in there, even though the Democrats never invoked the Epstein story against Trump. You might have found a wayward one or two. I think Ron Wyden actually has talked about it, maybe even during the Biden administration to some extent, and he's revealed that, hey, there's about $1.5 billion worth of wire transfers that took place in the form of, I think, like 4,700 transfers that involve Epstein and very prominent people. And guess what? That information's known about, it's documented, it's at our disposal, and it hasn't been released to the public. That could be, the Epstein files. But instead, no, we're just going to run to this show court that's not going to provide adequate answers at all about Epstein's past, his background, his associates, and his associations with intelligence services. I'm more with Wyden and the plan that Massey is organizing with Ro Khanna in Congress to force this issue to a halt. Get congressional legislation to back it. Will the Republicans support this? No, I don't think all the Republicans are going to support this because they want Trump to have full control of this cover-up. I think that's where we're at.
And what we actually want, we don't really care about what happened when he landed and a couple of weeks later killed himself. What we want is everything pertaining to the 2006 case. Remember? The one that Alan Dershowitz helped him settle. The case where he then was suddenly running the sheriff's office. The case where the feds agreed that as a part of the plea deal, no other person involved in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit was going to have charges brought against him. Like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein getting a slap on the wrist covers everybody. He's falling for everybody that could have been implicated in this case. Why would the feds have made that a part of the deal? Obviously, they were covering for powerful people that were caught up in Epstein's initial case, okay?
Yeah, I think she's right on that. The one downside I will say, and clarification to add to her, though, is that there are a lot of missing pieces from the evidence in that case and that conviction, because two things. Not only did local authorities basically tip Epstein off to the fact that there was going to be a raid on his house and he had ample time, I think a few days, to wipe his computers, throw them away, dispose of them, etc., in that property in Florida, but also because as part of this plea deal, it was a sweetheart plea deal. We all know about it. At least if you've been following this story, you know how ridiculous and absurd it is and how really that plea deal is only explainable if you're an intelligence asset, that they did not collect all the evidence that they could have from his properties as part of the plea deal. So there is limited information from what I gather on that one, but we know that there's a lot of evidence in the 2018 raids. And I say raid in the plural because he had many different properties. His New Mexico property wasn't raided, but I think they did raid the Little St. James property, the Manhattan property, the Florida property, and the Ohio property at least. And the Ohio property, by the way, was right behind Les Wexner's. What do you know?
So yeah, Trump's team filed that motion to unseal the grand jury transcripts. But like I said, looking at that AP News headline, it's because they already know they're not going to get anything. In that article, they cite two Manhattan federal prosecutors who both say that Trump knows that there's not going to be anything because grand jury testimonies in that district are known to be intentionally brief. They estimate that it'll be max between 60 and 100 pages of testimony. And they cite Sarah Krishoff, who was the assistant U.S. attorney for 13 years. She said, quote, "It's not going to be much because the Southern District of New York's practice is to put as little information as possible into the grand jury."
What a coincidence. What do you know? And that's what the Trump administration wants to reveal and unveil. What do you know?
So what are we to conclude about this, guys? Trump is playing games. He is. I'm sorry. He is flat out playing games right now. In fact, he's doing that thing that we always felt the press was doing to Trump supporters, thinking that we're stupid. Going, okay, they don't know much about how the law works. So if I just say I'm going to unseal something, then it looks like I'm acting, and then I'm going to call everybody who doesn't agree with that a troublemaker. He knows exactly what he's doing. So I went back because I'm going, is this new? Is Trump suddenly being brand new about the Epstein topic? And the reality is, when we looked back at clips, he's actually always been a bit wishy-washy on the Epstein points, okay?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I'm with Candace. Hey, props to her for saying this, but I think it's more than Trump playing games. It goes well beyond that at this point. He's actively covering up a child sex trafficking ring that involves some of the most prominent people in the world in what I believe was an obvious intelligence operation. That's what's happening. It's not just playing games. It's complicity in a cover-up, and he just is propagandizing and spinning this in the best direction he can. I know Candace supports Trump, and even to say that, this is on Trump is a big thing for a lot of his supporters. So I'm with her there. I would even go a step further, though.
People are circulating all of these old clips, and I want you guys to check out this one from back when he was running last year. He sat down with Lex Friedman. It was September. And this is what he said when Lex Friedman pressed him on his hesitancy to commit to releasing the files. Take a listen.
There's a moment where you had some hesitation about Epstein, releasing some of the documents on Epstein. Why the hesitation?
I don't think I'm not involved. I never went to his island, fortunately. But a lot of people did.
Why do you think so many smart, powerful people allowed him to get so close?
He was a good salesman. He was, was a hale and hearty type of guy. He had some nice assets that he'd throw around, like islands. But a lot of big people went to that island. But fortunately, I was not one of them.
It's just very strange for a lot of people that the list of clients that went to the island has not been made public.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Probably will be, by the way. Probably.
So if you're able to, you'll be...
Yeah, I'd certainly take a look at it. Now, Kennedy's interesting because it's so many years ago. They do that for danger, too, because, endangers certain people, et cetera, et cetera. So Kennedy is very different from the Epstein thing.
I think he tips his hand a little bit as to pivoting to Kennedy to show that, hey, prominent people, many of which were involved in that whole situation are dying off. And that's an excuse we can use to reveal more information from Kennedy, which I'm very glad about. I think it's one of the best things that Trump's done is redacted and released all the files that supposedly exist. In that case, it actually gleaned a lot of new information from people that study that case. But notice that he is willing to use this as a campaign tool to get elected. Fortunately, I was not part of that island. It's right when Candace says he's a little bit wishy-washy about releasing those files, but it was more his subordinates that are now in his orbit, in his administration, in his cabinet that talked about it. The Bonginos, the Bondis, and the Patels who made quasi-political careers of this. And ultimately the buck stops on him because he used discretion in putting those people in positions of prominence within his administration after knowing about that they did this.
But yeah, I'd be inclined to do the Epstein. I'd have no problem with it.
That's great to hear.
You see that I'm just not comfortable. It's not a straight answer. He says other people are going to get caught up in it, and but you then kind of pivots to talking about JFK files, which has always been very clear. I will release the files, and he does it again. By the way, a few months before he sat down with Lex Friedman, he sat with Rachel Compass Duffy of Fox News, and here is what he said to her regarding the Epstein files.
Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah.
Would you,
I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would, or at least
Do you think that would restore trust? Help restore trust?
Yeah, I don't know about Epstein so much as I do the others. Certainly about the way he died. It would be interesting to find out what happened there because that was a weird situation. And
yeah, that was a beyond weird situation. He is a little wishy-washy here, but he basically says, let it flow at the beginning. And to call it a Democratic hoax is, again, absurd. The Democrats didn't use this against Trump. They did use Russiagate. They did use the Jan 6 insurrection narrative. both absurdities. They did, conceal the Hunter Biden laptop story completely. So they did damage to Trump in other ways. It wasn't Epstein. So for him to spin it that way now is stupid. Let your supporters be the judge of what information is a hoax or not. They did a pretty good job searing through the lens of the Russiagate spectacle and coming to a correct conclusion that it was ridiculous. Couldn't they do this here? Couldn't we be the judge? Couldn't Americans deserve the transparency that you promised?
The cameras didn't happen to be working, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'd go a long way toward that one. The other stuff I would.
Kind of a weird answer, right? He's just not strong there. He's like, oh, well, that maybe there's a lot of fake stuff in there. And where? We're being told now that their Epstein files don't exist. So where's the fake stuff at? It could very much be the case in the way that Trump's describing, like people who got caught up in this, whatever it is, that people who were not aware of exactly what Jeffrey Epstein's purpose was, maybe he approaches them, he approaches Trump, he approaches people that have a business that he could hide a trafficking sort of organization in. Trump would be that kind of a person, right? You've got young women, you've got pageantry, okay? And he says, I'll give you cash, or I'll introduce you to somebody that will give you cash, inject cash, because he wants access to younger women. That's a thread here that I think would make sense because Trump is just not clear. And sometimes even when he's presenting arguments against it, where he's saying like, oh, well, I kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago, he's making it seem like he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago because he was inappropriate. In reality, it was like a real estate deal gone wrong. There's some background. Him and Epstein started hating each other because there was a property in Palm Beach that Les Wexner used to own, okay, a massive property. And then he sold it. And then the guy that purchased that property from Les Wexner, eventually he falls into bankruptcy. And Trump buys that property out of bankruptcy.
Yeah, I believe this happened in 2004, by the way. That seems to be the rift, the genuine rift point between Epstein and Trump. And after that, there's really no evidence that they had communications anymore. So this information you get about barring Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, it may be true. I haven't seen, that much actually to substantiate that, but that's been certainly thrown around. I think that came out way later, and it might not be, in relation to his creepiness. I don't think that Trump's on record saying he was creepy or, he was exploitative of women around me anytime at all. And if he knew nothing about that, you would be that way. You wouldn't say that. I mean, a lot of people that knew Epstein didn't necessarily, know all this until it came to fruition. I certainly think his associates did, but, Epstein met a lot of people over a lot of years, and a lot of people he met probably aren't implicated whatsoever, but we need to see the files. We need to see the information that's been collected to make that determination.
For whatever reason, something happened between Epstein and Trump where they were no longer friends after that deal. Maybe Epstein wanted to purchase that property back and Trump beat him to it. It sounds like a businessman falling out.
He definitely did. It was a bidding war. The two bid against it, and that's what caused a schism.
But the pause that Trump has here in releasing the files and in trying to basically cage it like there's a lot of fake stuff in there doesn't make sense to me. Okay, we're not falling for that. It's very strange, and it's weird to me that he has led this movement for so long and would give it all up, right, to try to gaslight his base on the Epstein matter.
Yeah, especially because it's so emblematic of what he used to stand for, what he used to say, the ultimate Trumpian creed, drain the swamp, right? And beside that, ancillary to that is transparency. We're going to be transparent about what the swamp did to bury their evil deeds. And one of those things is the Epstein story, which we'll never get answers on. And I don't think Trump's going to provide them. This court thing certainly isn't going to provide them with a grand jury testimony. They know it. That's why they're going down this avenue already. It's because they know it won't yield the results Americans want. If they want to give us the goods, disclose the wire transfers that Ron Wyden's talking about. Give us the files that Thomas Massey's trying to drum up legislation for. Give us the results of the FBI search. We know you found a safe in his property with discs with prominent people's names labeled on them. We know that exists. You can't put the genie back in the bottle on some of this stuff. We also want to know the results of him being an FBI informant, more than once, by the way, not only after his first conviction, but also after the Towers financial Ponzi scheme, which his associate went down for, Stephen Hoffenberg, and he was the informant. We know this happened twice. We haven't seen any information that he gave. Why? It's because it's a cover-up. It's because prominent people are involved, likely from all sides of the political aisle.
Anyways, in the meantime, I think we're all starting to recognize that we have been duped, right, in a very big way on this particular topic. But the silver lining in this is that we're all aware of it, right? Left and right coming together on this issue is a very good thing. So it doesn't matter how many times Trump tweets, well, the polls are up, or they try to pivot so that the left and the right start warring again. They're dangling a bunch of other carrots in front of us right now. Like Trump just tweeted, I think this morning, about the Brian Koberger case out of Idaho, which, yes, it's true, but that case has never made any sense. There seems to be something that's being hidden, some aspects, some explanation that seems to be hidden. Everything was done quietly.
And that's not the only minutia. I shouldn't say minutia. I mean, it's a serious case, but that's not the only diversionary tactic Trump's tried to use. The day after, that press conference where he complained about, why is everyone talking about Epstein? I can't believe everyone's talking about Epstein. We had this disaster in Texas. The next day, he's tweeting about, on Truth Social, revoking Rosie O'Donnell's citizenship. That's true. That's something that Sagar and Jetty pointed out on Flagrant, and it's just perfectly emblematic about this. Rank hypocrisy by saying, why are you focusing on this? Focus on the real issues, and you're going to throw that out there. He also decided to rearm Ukraine recently. That's a diversionary tactic. It's not in the same realm of, just minutia that very few people care about. That's a serious issue, but they are trying to pivot from this. They're trying to get away from this because all the polls are showing that the base is not accepting this explanation. And good. And I don't care if the Democrats are being opportunistic about this. I think many of them are, by the way. But people like Ron Wyden, that he has been interested in transparency issues going far back. He was one of the ones that kind of questioned James Clapper when Clapper lied on this in congressional testimony, saying there wasn't any bulk data collection by the NSA. So yeah, Candace is totally right on this part.
And now he's tweeting about that. Oh, we got to look into this case. You got Pam Bondi. Similarly, she say, oh, well, guess what? We just figured out, or maybe it was Kash Patel who tweeted this, that Obama was a part of the fake dossier. Yeah, all of that matters. But it seems like it's trying to distract us away from the Epstein story, because that's the big fish here. That is the thing that undoes it all.
He's exactly right. They put out that Russiagate memo, which is significant, by the way. It demonstrates that the Democratic administration was aware that the Russiagate thing was exactly a hoax, and they pushed it for years and years. The mainstream media was totally complicit with it. But everyone deserves answers on the Epstein story. All those things notwithstanding, they are trying to divert attention from it, and they're doing it in ways that's related to the topic. That's a transparency release, right? That was a document redacted by Tulsi Gabbard, it seems, with at least partial intent of getting people to stop talking about Epstein. Well, here's my suggestion. Keep talking about Epstein. Keep clamoring for these releases. Don't let this story die, because this is involved in the heart and center of what you are trying to convince Americans that you are campaigning on. And that's openness. It's transparency. It's departing from the clandestine ways of the past where the swamp would control everything under the thumb of the American people and without the knowledge of the American taxpayer. That's what you said. That's what your subordinates said. That's what Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi said as they were kind of auditioning for the roles that you gave them, Trump. You practiced that discretion to put them in these key positions after they made those promises. So don't involve yourself in the cover-up, and don't think the American people are stupid enough to swallow that this is a Democratic hoax. Your base isn't swallowing that. And by the way, they pin almost all of these political issues and this society's woes on the Democrats. This time it isn't working because we remember history. A few years ago is a few years ago, and the news cycle moves super fast, but we know that the Democrats didn't use this as their choice saber in the warfare against Trump. No, they chose Russiagate. That's what Trump went down for. The deep state did frame the sitting president of the United States for treason for a stupid hoax when, there's plenty of other things to criticize Trump for, but that was a hoax. And that's what we're dealing with now. So Candace is exactly right here. Trump is involved in the cover-up. They're trying to get out of this. And it doesn't make sense to release what you're saying doesn't exist or is a Democratic hoax? So we deserve answers. I gave some suggestions about what materials do exist. There's more than that. A lot of people have compiled things that we could get that we know are existent because of documentation. It's not just something that you can say it doesn't exist when other government sources say it exists. And that's just documented things. Also, Bondi talked about the thousands of hours of Epstein molesting children. That's not what I want to release. Don't release that. Obviously, no one's called for that. And the way she behaved in that press conference, acting like that's what people wanted to see, is pretty insulting, by the way. We want, documentation about what was on those tapes. Someone from federal authorities needs to hold the criminals accountable for that. I know they're spinning it now to say it's child porn, but that's not what you told us originally, and it's impossible to mistake the two situations. I just don't think that's possible. When Alina Habba goes on an interview and says, hey, when we reveal this information, this list of names is going to shock you. That needs to come out. So if you're referring to materials that you now say no longer exist, you have to come clean with the American people. And there's been no apologies. Even if this was true, in the 0.1% chance that this was true, this is a hoax, they don't exist, they're not apologizing for it because they never do. The federal authorities never apologize as they ruin your lives in various ways, tax you out the gazoo, spend money on overseas wars, shell out hundreds of billions of dollars to the biggest corporations in the world. You never get apologies for it. Shut down your society over an abstraction in the air. Restrict religious worship and assembly rights and shut down businesses. No apologies. Shut down kids' after-school programs. No apologies. Make your grandparents die alone in a hospital where you cannot visit them. No apologies. I don't think we're going to see any apologies from the Epstein story either, but I do want to hear from what you guys think. Let me know down below. Is this a bipartisan cover-up? Is Trump wrong to address this in the manner he has, specifically pertaining to calling it a Democratic hoax? And is this going to hurt Trump into the midterms? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Candace too. She is awesome. So glad about her coverage on this issue. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. Click the join button below. If you do that, you'll help out the channel and you'll get access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.